feel stuck. No, that's not quite right. I feel like I'm about to get stuck. Is it the thought of being stuck that makes me anxious, or is that just a part of me? Who really knows? I just can't shake the feeling that something needs to change. Almost like I need some sort of a sign I'm heading in the right direction, or I'm just gonna be like this forever, stuck. I don't know if that'll happen though. Signs like that might not even exist. I mean, at this point, I don't even know for a fact if my car's gonna let me leave. Sure didn't last time. I guess I should probably take each day as it comes though, so we'll see what happens. I guess the one thing I do have going for me is I did remember to leave the e-brake off, so hopefully this time it didn't seize to begin with. One way to find out, I guess. I mentally prepped for the worst, but surprisingly got the best. With a small clunk, the car did move, so maybe my luck isn't so bad after all. Who am I kidding? That's definitely not it. My confidence in the E30 hasn't been the best lately. Ever since the brakes randomly seized in the middle of another issue, driving the car has been nerve-wracking. Any given time I move the car might be the time it decides to lock up again. Sure, I can just avoid the handbrake, but maybe that's not the full extent of the problem. Could be the brakes themselves. Until I take apart the rear, I really won't know for sure. And all I can do is hope for the best and wait. Plus, after many delays, it looks like the rebuild kit should get here today. All we've got to do is wait. With an issue like this, there's a number of things that could be the actual culprit. And while you could spend time investigating all of the components to see which specific one caused the issue, on a car this old it almost makes sense to just replace everything. And even if that wasn't the culprit, your car's still going to be better than when you started. And you'll have narrowed it down quite a bit. In our case, however, I've got a pretty strong suspicion that it lies with the parking brake system. So what I got is all that's needed to replace it, and then some. And then some is referring to rotors. We have some really aggressive and pretty new pads on the car, but when we swapped those on, we never actually swapped the rotors. At the time, the rotors that were on the car were quite new, but now they're showing their age. They're covered in rust now, and that could have also been part of our issue. So covering all the bases sounds like a smart play to me. The parking brake, on the other hand, is going to get pretty much entirely replaced. I'd like to replace every single wear part, starting with what actually holds the brakes still. These are parking brake shoes, and if they look similar to what's inside a drum brake, they are. Even though my E30 has four-wheel disc brakes, the parking brakes are drum brakes and they live underneath the rear rotor. So technically speaking, this car has both drum and disc brakes on the same wheel. Kinda weird, but also pretty cool from an engineering standpoint. They're a little bit different than real drum brakes, but a lot of what we have to replace is going to be very similar to something like an actual set of drum brakes. I'm thinking it'll be a really interesting system to learn about. There is, however, quite a bit of parts on the car that need to come off for us to even see these brakes. Namely, the rear calipers and rotors need to come off, which thankfully is quite simple. With the wheel off, we can inspect the rotors themselves, and they're honestly more than serviceable. Considering just how aggressive the pads we have on this car are, I'm surprised these aren't worn more, to be honest. And what's even more interesting is the fact that there's a drum brake sitting underneath this. The outside of the rotor is gripped by the pads and the caliper, but the inside has those expanding trailing shoes. So 2 brake systems on 1 rotor. Super interesting. With the rotor removed, we can see just where most of our issues are coming from. This is the emergency brake system, and it's quite crusty. The lining on these trailing shoes is pretty much entirely gone, and they're actually cracked in a number of places. Plus, the inside of the actual rotor is just as rusty, so I'm pretty sure this is what ended up seizing. And while it looks complicated if you've never worked on drum brakes, it's actually really simple to take apart. Pretty much everything is just held in with spring tension. There's a return spring top and bottom which can be popped out with pliers, and on either side there's a holding spring which can be turned 90 degrees and then the whole shoe will pop out. And pretty much once one spring is out of place, the whole thing starts to fall apart pretty easily. The way these actually stop the car is by pushing out as you pull the cable up. And this adjusting screw, which has seen better days, helps define how far in these actually go when you drop the cable down. When they're not activated, in other words. And with the old and new pieces side by side, it's pretty easy to see just how bad these actually were. One of the worst ways these can possibly fail is if these springs end up snapping. They hold the shoes in, so if one were to break, they would be pushed out and constantly be making contact with the rotor. In other words, good luck getting it apart. I also noticed just how little lining was left on the old shoes. My honest guess is these are original or close to it, so I'm not really that surprised that they started to have issues. Everything is just covered in dust, and I'd like to get rid of as much of it as possible, so brake cleaner is going to be our best friend. There's also this little adjusting lever that sits at the end of the parking brake cable. As you pull on the cable in the car, it pulls on the end of this, which causes the whole system to expand and stop the car. Shockingly, it's really only held in with a pin though, and we're going to replace this too. The cable, however, looks to be in great shape. Weirdly, it looks newer than anything else in the system. To no surprise to anyone, putting this on is kind of the exact reverse process of taking it off. It's not quite as simple though. The little lever goes on easy, and it even comes with a new pin. The part that gets a little annoying is everything else. Unlike taking it apart where we're relieving tension, we are adding tension in this case. So the easiest way to get it all back together is not to put everything back on one piece at a time. I actually found it easiest to slide as much of it as possible on together. So the adjustment screw and the top spring was installed before anything went on the car. That way the top spring would hold the top half in some sort of a tension, and I could use pliers to reinstall the spring on the bottom. Easier said than done though. Getting everything in place and lined up is by far the most frustrating part, but it's not near impossible. Once the top and bottom springs are in place, the hold springs can go back in, and then we can start adjusting it. Inside the car, when the parking brake lever is down, we don't want these to be touching the rotor. Otherwise, you'd be driving with the brakes on. When that lever's pulled up, though, we want them to be in full contact. There's an adjustment screw built into the system, and that basically changes the resting position of the shoes. So before anything else goes back on, I need to make sure this is set properly. And the easiest way I found to do it was to expand it until, when you put the rotor on, you can feel tension from the shoes. Then you can simply back it up a couple notches and do the rest of the adjustments from the cable in the car. At least that's what I'm gonna try. Once I found an adjustment I was happy with, I was finally able to reassemble this side. And what I had to do next was repeat the entire process once again on the other side. Thankfully, things always go faster the second time. finished the second side and ran into a big issue. I was out of time for the day, and there was nothing I could really do about it. And it's not like I can really drive the car yet, since there's one more thing I need to do related to adjustment. But sadly, that'll be tomorrow's job. Oh well. Part of working on cars, I guess. I've been struggling with feelings of complacency lately. Like I'm not doing enough. I'm worried I'm stuck in place and not gonna get where I want to be. And this whole time I've been waiting for a sign. Something to let me know that I'm on the right path, that I'm doing enough, that I'll get where I want to be. And I mean, if you don't see some sort of sign you're on the right path, is it even worth continuing? Well, that's the weird part. I mean, who even said that signs like that exist to begin with? What if they don't? The following morning, I returned very ready to get this car moving again. And the only real thing stopping it is the adjustment inside the car. We need to adjust both of the cables on this lever so that when they are up, the shoes at the wheels are engaged and they can't move. We also need to make sure that when the lever's down, they're not engaged at all. So really, we just need to play around with the length a bit. I guess there's only one way to tell if I'm on the right track. The lever is up and the cable's tight, so the wheel shouldn't move, right? It looks like all of our time spent adjusting actually paid off. The emergency brake seems to work just as intended, so technically this car should be good to go. Well, not quite yet. Since in the process of doing this, we did replace the rear rotors, I would like to do that for the front as well. The front rotors haven't given me any issues at all, but I really just don't want to worry about having two different ages of rotors on the car. I'd rather them both just be new at the same time. And thankfully, rotor swaps are quite easy, especially on this car. I torqued down all four wheels and was finally ready to get this car moving again. It really is a never-ending to-do list though, and today is no exception. Since we have new rotors, we need to bed them in. Otherwise, they are very unsafe and don't really stop the car very well. In our case, how we break these in is doing a number of repeatedly aggressive stops on some back roads, which, in my opinion, is exactly how I'd like to spend the afternoon. And the good news is that the emergency brake works. That wasn't really the issue though, since it worked before. The issue is after a couple days of the car sitting still, the brakes would fuse solid. So the only way to test if that's going to happen is to try and make it happen. All I had to do was wait, which is easier said than done. It's pretty easy to feel stuck when your life is somewhat repetitive. Sure, you're working on different things each day, and you are working towards an overall goal, but it's not always easy to see that, especially in the short term. And because of that, it's easy to feel stuck, to question if your efforts are doing anything. What if your goals are unrealistic? What if your work doesn't mean anything? What if you never get where you want to go? Those are all impossible to know. Just like it's impossible to know what the right direction is, or if you'll even get there. But just because you don't know that does not mean that it's not worth trying to get there. It doesn't matter if you don't know where you'll end up. Nobody does. The only way to figure out where that is to try and get there. So really, even if you feel like you can't move, at the end of the day, you're only really as stuck as you think you are. And the only fate worse than failing is not knowing if you could have succeeded. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.